My fiancée wanted closure with her ex. I gave it to her. Have you ever had a moment where the entire world seems to go quiet? Not the peaceful, comforting quiet of a sleeping house, but the dead, airless, and absolute quiet of a vacuum. It's a silence so profound you can hear the blood rushing in your own ears. A silence where a single, spoken word could shatter the very fabric of your reality. That's what happened to me last month. I was sitting in our favorite restaurant, a cozy, overpriced Italian place with checkered tablecloths and ridiculously dim lighting. The kind of place where I was planning to finalize the catering details for our wedding. My fiancée, Sarah, the woman I had spent the last 5 years of my life building a future with, had just dropped a bomb on the table between us. A bomb so devastating and so unexpected that the entire universe seemed to hold its breath to hear the fallout. I just think, she began, her voice a low, careful murmur as she swirled the deep red wine in her glass, her gaze fixed on the vortex she was creating, that things are moving a little too fast. I'm not sure I'm ready to commit right now. I just stared at her, my mind a blank, white screen, struggling to process the words she had just spoken. We had been together for 5 years. We had been engaged for 6 months. Our wedding, a meticulously planned and almost entirely paid for affair, was in 3 months. We lived together in a house that I owned, a home where my name was on the mortgage, the utilities, everything. Her name was on a supplementary credit card, a card that I, of course, paid for every month. For 5 years, I had been the steady, reliable architect of our shared life, and she was now talking about pumping the brakes just 100 feet from the finish line. So, I finally managed to say, my voice sounding distant and strange, as if it were coming from someone else at a nearby table. "You're calling off the wedding?" "No, not at all," she said quickly, a little too quickly, her hand darting across the table to cover mine. Her touch, which had always been a source of comfort, of home, felt strange and foreign, the hand of a stranger. I just need a pause," she explained, her voice now taking on a soft, pleading tone that I knew was a well-honed tool in her emotional arsenal. "I need you to wait for me, just for a little while, just until I can figure some things out. I love you, Ben. You know that. I just need to be absolutely sure before we take this final step. Can you do that for me? Can you just wait?" Her friends, Ashley and Megan, our designated wedding planning committee for the evening, were nodding along in a synchronized, well-rehearsed display of supportive solidarity, their eyes fixed on me with a mixture of pity and a strange, almost clinical, expectation. "It's totally normal, Ben," Ashley chimed in, her voice a soothing, patronizing coo. "A lot of women get cold feet before the big day. It's a huge commitment. You just have to give her some space to breathe, to process." I looked at Sarah's face, at her earnest, pleading expression, at the single, artfully produced tear that was now tracing a path down her cheek. But her eyes, her beautiful, expressive eyes, were already somewhere else. She wasn't asking for space. She was asking for a safety net. She wanted the ring, the status, the security of being my fiancée, but she also wanted the untethered, consequence-free freedom of a single woman. She wanted me to sit patiently on a shelf, a reliable, well-loved toy she could come back to when she was finished playing, when she had figured things out. And in that dead, airless, and profoundly illuminating quiet, a decision formed in my mind. It wasn't an emotional, knee-jerk reaction. It was a cold, hard, and logical one. It was a simple, clean, and absolute solution to a problem I had just in that moment realized was unsolvable. I gently pulled my hand away from hers, a small, but significant, act of reclamation. I smiled, a small, tight, and completely insincere smile, and I gave her the answer she so desperately wanted to hear. "Of course," I said, my voice a perfect, convincing imitation of an understanding and supportive partner. "I understand. Take all the time you need. I'll wait." The relief that flooded her face was a palpable, almost physical, thing. She squeezed my arm, her expression a mask of pure, unadulterated gratitude. "Oh, thank you, baby," she beamed, her smile now genuine and radiant. "I knew you'd understand. You're the best." Ashley and Megan smiled their approval, their work as her emotional support team done. The good, understanding boyfriend had been successfully placated. The potential crisis had been averted. They spent the rest of the dinner in a giddy, triumphant mood, their conversation immediately and seamlessly pivoting to the planning of a girls' trip to Miami, a trip they now scheduled for the very weekend that was supposed to have been our wedding. It would be, they squealed with a delight that made my stomach turn, a trip to celebrate Sarah finding herself. I just sat there, a ghost in my own wake, nodding and smiling in all the right places, paying for their endless rounds of expensive, celebratory cocktails, and listening as they gleefully planned a party on the smoldering ashes of our shared future. I was the best, all right. I was the best damn fool they had ever seen. But not for long. That night, after I had dropped the 3 of them off, their laughter and their plans for Miami still ringing in my ears, I went home to our quiet house, my house, and I started to work. There was no rage. There was no heartbreak. There was just a calm, cold, and almost exhilarating clarity. She wanted me to wait. Fine. She could wait. She could wait and see what happened next. My first move was a financial one, a silent, surgical strike at the heart of the comfortable, carefree life I had so lovingly and foolishly provided for her. I'm a software developer, and for the past 2 years, I had been pouring every spare ounce of my time and my energy into a personal project, a niche application that had, through a combination of luck and sheer, brute force coding, recently been bought out by a major tech company. The deal had closed just 3 weeks earlier. It was a life-changing, almost absurd amount of money, a fact that Sarah was well aware of, a fact that I now realized, with a sickening, dawning horror, was the almost certain catalyst for a sudden and conveniently timed crisis of commitment. I called my financial advisor, a man I had hired the day the deal was finalized, and I instructed him to move the entire sum into a series of complex, irrevocable trusts and a labyrinth of offshore accounts. It was now, for all intents and purposes, untouchable, a ghost in the financial machine. Next, I turned my attention to our shared finances. I called the credit card company, and, with a calm, detached voice, I canceled her supplementary card. I then logged into our online banking and closed the joint account she used for her daily and often extravagant expenses. I called my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had handled the legal side of my app's acquisition, and I instructed her to draft the necessary paperwork to have Sarah's name removed from the title of the car, the brand new, fully loaded SUV I had bought for her as a birthday present 2 years ago. Then, I went digital. I logged into my social media accounts, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, everything. And I didn't just deactivate them. I permanently, and with a deep, cleansing satisfaction, deleted them. Years of photos, of tagged memories, of digital connections, gone in a series of final, definitive clicks. My digital footprint, my online existence was wiped clean. I meticulously backed up my phone's contacts to a secure, external hard drive, and then I performed a factory reset, erasing every last trace of my digital life. I snapped the SIM card in half and dropped it into the trash. My final move was a physical one. I packed a single large suitcase, not with clothes, but with the essential components of my work and my new, untethered life. My high-powered laptops, my external hard drives containing years of code, and the thick, intimidating stack of legal documents that formalize the creation of my new company. I walked through the house one last time, a detached observer in the museum of my own failed relationship. I looked at her clothes, still hanging in the closet, her expensive makeup spread across the bathroom counter, her half-read books and silly, decorative knickknacks on the shelves. I didn't touch any of it. I just looked at it all, at the physical manifestations of a life that, just a few hours ago, had been my own, and I felt nothing but a cold, liberating indifference. I wrote a single, 2-word note on a piece of paper and left it on the kitchen counter, in the exact spot where she had so often left her own passive-aggressive missives for me. It said, simply, "I'll wait." Then I walked out the front door, got into my car, drove to the airport, and, using a brand new credit card from my secret personal account, I bought a one-way, first-class ticket to a small, coastal country on the other side of the world, a country where I had always dreamed of living, a dream she had always dismissed as unrealistic. By the time Sarah woke up the next morning, well-rested and ready to embark on her new, exciting life of consequence-free freedom, I was already gone. I was a ghost. I've been living in a small, sun-drenched coastal town in Portugal for the last 6 weeks. I rented a beautiful, modern villa that's perched on a cliff overlooking the endless and impossibly blue Atlantic Ocean. The internet is fast, the food is incredible, the wine is cheap, and most importantly, nobody here knows my name. The silence, the absence of drama, the lack of any and all expectations has been the most profound and healing part of it all. It's just me, the rhythmic, soothing sound of the waves crashing against the rocks below, and the quiet, contented hum of my new, untangled life. I wouldn't have known about the chaotic and, frankly, deeply satisfying meltdown I had left in my wake if it weren't for my brother Dan. He's the only person in the world who knows where I am, the only lifeline I've maintained to my old life. We talk once a week, a scheduled video call, where he, with a mixture of brotherly concern and a poorly concealed, schadenfreude-fueled glee, gives me the play-by-play of Sarah's slow motion and entirely self-inflicted implosion. It has been, to put it mildly, illuminating. According to Dan, the first week of my absence was exactly what Sarah had envisioned for her break. She had, with a breathtaking arrogance, told everyone that I was being incredibly supportive and understanding, and was giving her the space she needed to find herself. She and her friends, the ever-loyal and equally clueless Ashley and Megan, had embarked on a week-long celebration of her newfound freedom, going out every night to expensive restaurants and trendy bars, running up a truly astronomical tab on a credit card that, unbeknownst to them, had already been canceled. The first inkling of trouble, the first crack in her delusional facade, came on that Friday. Sarah, in preparation for another glamorous night out, had tried to buy a new dress at a high-end boutique, a dress that no doubt cost a small fortune. The card was declined. She tried another. Declined. A frantic and no doubt humiliating call to the credit card company informed her that the supplementary card had been unceremoniously canceled by the primary account holder. Dan said she had called him in a full-blown panic, her voice a shrill, incredulous shriek, asking if he knew what was going on, if he had heard from me. He, a master of feigned ignorance, had played his part perfectly. "I don't know, Sarah," he'd said, his voice a mask of innocent confusion. "That's so weird. Maybe you should talk to Ben." "I'm trying," she had apparently screamed into the phone. "He's not answering his phone. It's like he's disappeared." She had spent that entire weekend in a state of escalating, frantic desperation, trying to contact me. Her texts, a barrage of angry, confused, and increasingly pleading messages, went undelivered. Her calls went straight to a cold, impersonal, and deeply unsatisfying disconnected message. She had then, in a move of dawning horror, checked my social media accounts, the digital hubs of our shared life. And that's when the real, gut-wrenching panic must have truly set in. My digital footprint, my entire online existence, had been wiped clean. I was a ghost in the machine. The second week was when her campaign of desperation began in earnest. She started texting our mutual friends, her tone at first a carefully constructed casualness. "Hey, have you heard from Ben? He's being a little weird and not answering his phone. Just wanted to make sure he's okay." No one had. By the end of that second week, the texts had become more frantic, more unhinged. She was now telling people that I was missing, that she was deeply worried that something terrible had happened to me. She was trying, with a pathetic and transparent desperation, to recast herself as the concerned, loving, and abandoned fiancée whose partner had vanished in a thin air without a trace. Some people, the more gullible and less informed members of our social circle, actually bought it. Her parents, whipped into a frenzy of parental concern by their distraught and manipulative daughter, had even gone so far as to call the police and file a missing persons report. The police, blessed their pragmatic and underpaid hearts, had come to my house, had seen that my car was gone, that a single large suitcase was missing, and had correctly and efficiently concluded that I had, in all likelihood, left voluntarily. There was no evidence of struggle, no sign of foul play. They had politely informed Sarah and her parents that there was nothing they could do. The real turning point, the moment of her true and undeniable reckoning, according to Dan, was when she had finally used her own key to enter my house. She had, he said, apparently walked in with her friends, no doubt expecting to find me sitting in the dark, a pathetic, heartbroken mess, mourning her absence. Instead, she had found the house exactly as she had left it, a silent, sun-drenched museum of her own abandoned life. Her things were all there, untouched, a testament to my indifference. The only things missing were me, my computers, my hiking boots, and, of course, the single two-word note I had left for her on the kitchen counter. Dan said she had called him, absolutely hysterical, after finding the note. "What does this mean?" She had apparently sobbed into the phone. "I'll wait." "Wait for what? Where's he? What is he doing?" Dan's response, he told me with a proud, brotherly chuckle, was a masterpiece of deadpan perfection. "I guess he's waiting for you to figure things out, Sarah," he'd said. "That's what you asked for, right?" The third week was when the cold, hard, and unforgiving reality of her new, untethered life came crashing down on her. The sleek, new SUV I had bought for her, the one that was in my name, was unceremoniously repossessed from in front of her parents' house. Her own parents, faced with a massive, five-figure credit card bill she had so joyfully racked up in her first, glorious week of freedom, had, for the first time in her life, apparently told her no. They had paid the bill to protect their own credit, but had informed her she would be paying them back with interest. Ashley and Megan, her loyal, sycophantic cheerleaders, the ones who had so eagerly encouraged her journey of self-discovery, began to distance themselves. Her drama, her chaos, her constant, tearful phone calls were no longer fun. She was a liability, a sinking ship they were desperate to abandon. She had started showing up at my old office, a place I hadn't worked at in weeks, begging my former colleagues for information, for my new contact details, for any clue as to my whereabouts. They, of course, knew nothing. She had even, in a move of supreme and misguided desperation, gone to my parents' house, where my father, a man of few words and even less patience for drama, had told her, in no uncertain terms, that she was no longer welcome there. By the end of that first month, she had become a social pariah in our old, tight-knit circle of friends. Everyone knew the truth now, or at least a version of it that was close enough. She had tried to play a game, a high-stakes game of emotional and financial chicken, and she had lost spectacularly and humiliatingly. The story, the one that was now being whispered at dinner parties and over brunch, was not of a brave woman seeking freedom, but of an entitled, greedy, and foolish woman who had driven her successful, and now very wealthy, fiancé away. She had, in the parlance of our generation, fumbled the biggest bag of her life. It's been 3 months now. The vibrant, chaotic energy of the summer in Portugal has given way to a quieter, more contemplative autumn. I've settled into a comfortable routine. I've started a new company, a small, nimble consulting firm that allows me to leverage my skills and my newfound capital in a way that is both profitable and, for the first time, deeply fulfilling. The work is interesting, the hours are my own, and I can do it from anywhere in the world with a decent internet connection. I've even made a few friends, a small, eclectic group of fellow expats and locals who know me not as the man who was publicly jilted, but just as Ben, the quiet American who likes to surf in the mornings and drink strong coffee in the afternoons. I'm not waiting for anything. I'm living. I'm building. I'm feeding. Dan called me last week with the latest, and in many ways, the most predictable news from the home front. It seems Sarah's situation has continued to devolve in the most tragically karmic of ways. After being unceremoniously shunned by her old friends, she had apparently attempted a full-scale reinvention of herself. She had moved out of her parents' house, a move no doubt fueled by a desperate need to escape their constant, disappointed gazes, and had moved in with Ashley, her last remaining ally. That ill-fated arrangement had lasted for approximately 2 months. According to Dan, who had heard the gory details from a friend of a friend, it had ended, as so many of her relationships do, in a massive, screaming, and deeply personal fight over money. Sarah had, with a breathtaking sense of entitlement, apparently expected Ashley to cover her share of the rent and utilities indefinitely, a loan she would, of course, pay back as soon as she got back on her feet. Ashley, who was, it seems, finally tired of funding her friend's extended and expensive delusions, had unceremoniously kicked her out. And so, Sarah had been forced to make the humiliating retreat back to her childhood bedroom, back to the suffocating world of her parents' disappointment. She had also, Dan informed me, been forced to get a real full-time job. No more vague, part-time consulting gigs that were really just hobbies funded by my income. She is now working as a hostess at a mid-range suburban chain restaurant, the very same one, in fact, that we used to go to on cheap date nights when we first started dating. The irony, Dan had noted with a dark chuckle, was almost poetic. The most interesting, and in many ways the most pathetic development, however, is the new narrative she is so desperately trying to spin. She is no longer the concerned, worried fiancé whose partner has mysteriously vanished. That story, in the face of the overwhelming truth, had lost its currency. Now, she is the tragic, blameless victim of a cruel, manipulative, and emotionally abusive man who abandoned her without cause. She is telling anyone who will listen that I was secretive and controlling, that my sudden and unexpected wealth had changed me, turning me into a monster, and that I had disappeared to avoid my responsibilities to her. It's a bold, audacious, and almost impressive strategy, a complete and total rewriting of history. But it's not working. The problem for her, the fatal flaw in her new narrative, is that too many people know the truth. Too many people were at that fateful dinner. Too many people received her frantic, unhinged, and deeply revealing texts in the chaotic weeks that followed my departure. Dan told me about a particularly pathetic and telling incident that had happened a couple of weeks ago. She had run into a group of our old friends at a bar. She had tried to join their conversation, immediately launching into her well-rehearsed sob story about how I had so cruelly and inexplicably ghosted her. One of them, a guy named Mike, a good friend of mine from college, had finally had enough. He had, according to Dan, cut her off mid-sentence. "Sarah, we were all there," he'd said, his voice not angry, but just tired. "We all heard you. You told him to wait. You wanted to pause your engagement so you could have a girls' trip to Miami. You did this to yourself. Ben's not the bad guy here. He just gave you exactly what you asked for." Dan said the entire group had just stared at her, their silence a more damning indictment than any argument could ever be. She had, apparently, completely and utterly fallen apart, her carefully constructed victimhood shattering under the weight of a single, simple truth. She had started crying and yelling about how none of them understood, about how they were all taking my side, and had caused such a scene that she had ended up getting kicked out of the bar. Her friends, her last line of defense, Ashley and Megan, have now completely and publicly cut her off. They are, Dan told me with a laugh, now telling everyone that Sarah is toxic and that they had tried to warn her she was making a huge mistake. They have conveniently, and with a breathtaking lack of self-awareness, forgotten their own starring roles as her primary enablers and cheerleaders. They are now, in a final, ironic twist, trying to salvage their own social reputations by throwing her under the bus. It's a lonely life, I imagine, when you burn every single bridge you've ever crossed. She thought she was playing a game of high-stakes chess, but she didn't realize that I wasn't playing. I had simply, and with a quiet finality, knocked the entire board over and walked away. It has been a year, a full, transformative, and beautifully quiet year. I am still in Portugal, but I have moved from a small, coastal town to a larger, more vibrant apartment in the heart of Lisbon. My new consulting firm is thriving, the work interesting and challenging, the success a quiet, satisfying hum beneath the surface of my new life. I have been dating a woman here, a brilliant and beautiful local architect named Sophia. It's serious. It's real. It's the furthest thing imaginable from the drama-filled, high-stakes performance that my life with Sarah had become. I went home for Christmas last year, my first trip back to the States since I had so abruptly and completely disappeared. I stayed for 2 weeks, and it was a strange, almost surreal experience. It was like visiting a town you used to live in, only to find that all the street names have been changed, the landmarks have been moved. It was familiar, yet foreign. The world, my old world, had moved on without me, which was, of course, exactly what I had wanted. I didn't see Sarah. I made a conscious and deliberate point of avoiding the places I knew she might be. But I heard about her. Oh, did I ever hear about her? The story of our breakup, of my great vanishing act, as it has apparently been dubbed, has become something of a local legend, a cautionary tale told over brunch and cocktails. Her life, I was told by a series of well-meaning but gossipy friends, has not improved. She is still living with her parents. She is still working as a hostess at the same chain restaurant. Her desperate attempts to win back the sympathy and support of our old social circle have all failed. She has become, in the small, closed world of our hometown, a pariah, a living, breathing testament to the destructive power of her own entitlement and greed. My brother, Dan, filled me in on the final and most pathetic chapter of her story so far. About 2 months ago, she had apparently, and with a desperation that is almost pitiable, hired a lawyer, a budget, no-win, no-fee kind of guy who probably advertises on late-night television. She was trying to sue me for breach of promise and emotional distress. She was claiming, with a logic so twisted it was almost impressive, that our engagement had been a verbal contract and that my sudden and unexpected disappearance had cost her years of her life and her potential earning power. My lawyer back home, the same sharp, no-nonsense woman who had so efficiently helped me secure my assets a year ago, received the demand letter. She told me, when I called her, that she had actually laughed out loud when she read it. She had sent back a single, one-page response. It had included a signed and notarized affidavit from our wedding planner, a woman who had been a silent but deeply disapproving witness to the fateful dinner, in which she detailed the events of that evening, including Sarah's explicit request for me to wait. It had also included a copy of the restaurant receipt from that night, a document that showed the $400 I'd spent on her and her friend's celebratory freedom dinner. The final paragraph of my lawyer's letter was a simple, elegant, and utterly devastating masterpiece of legal prose. It stated that I had, in fact, honored her request. I had waited. I was in fact still waiting. I was just choosing to do it from a different continent, and that I would, in all likelihood, continue to wait indefinitely. It ended by wishing her the very best in her own, ongoing, and now very solitary, period of waiting. She had dropped the lawsuit the next day. Her lawyer had, no doubt, informed her that she had a snowball's chance in hell of winning. That's the end of the story, really. There was no big, dramatic confrontation. There was no tearful, cinematic reunion. There was no satisfying, in-person moment of me telling her off to her face. My revenge, if you can even call it that, wasn't about that. My revenge was my absence. It was the gaping, silent, and ever-present hole I left in her life where a comfortable, secure, and entirely unearned future used to be. She wanted to put me on pause, to treat me like a convenience, a safety net she could access whenever she was ready. She thought her request for me to wait was a power move, a way to control the situation, to have her cake and eat it too. She didn't realize, in her breathtaking arrogance, that was the last decision she would ever get to make in our relationship. I just let her words, her selfish, thoughtless words, hang in the air, and then I built a new and far better world for myself in the silence that followed. I hear she's still waiting.